Who wanted to make sure it was being recorded. So hello everybody, and welcome to this session of Meet the New Critics. Today we're with Green Party leader and official opposition leader Peter Bevan-Baker. And Peter, as we know, has recently become the new Agriculture and Land Critic for the Green Party, as well as his original critic portfolios that he's retaining for Indigenous, Francophone and Acadian, and Intergovernmental Affairs. So we can talk to Peter about all of those things today. Before we get started, I just want to do an acknowledgement that the land on which we are virtually gathered, but physically probably all of us here on PEI, is the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. This land was known and still is known as Evaquit, which was one of the 7 provinces of Mi'kmaqi. And so we are honored to be on and grateful to be sharing this land. And that's obviously, we've got Peter's in charge of both land and Indigenous affairs. So that's especially relevant to this conversation. And so Peter probably doesn't need very much of an introduction. I just kind of mentioned that he's had these other portfolios for the last couple of years and has taken on agriculture and land. And I'm going to start off with a few questions for Peter to get us started. And then, of course, the reason that we invited you all here is mostly for Peter to listen to what you have to say. What topics, what issues do you think that Peter should be aware of? What do you think are priorities that you would like to see him work on over the next couple of years with this role? And so we look forward to that discussion. So to start off, Peter, just before we jump into your new critic portfolio of agriculture and land, I just want to ask you a little bit about those portfolios of Indigenous and Francophone and Intergovernmental Affairs over the last couple of years. And I know it's often something that those are often portfolios that we see premiers reserve for themselves as well, and perhaps also leaders of the opposition. I haven't looked far back in history, but can you tell us a little bit about those your experience with those portfolios, and what types of issues have you dealt with under those in the last couple of years?
Sure, thanks, Jordan, firstly for arranging all of these Meet the New Critics events that we've had over the last few weeks and will continue to have, and for the enormous amount of work that it takes to make this happen. So thank you, Jordan. I don't take that for granted. And I also thank you for all of the faces and names that I see out there, lots of familiar ones and a couple of unfamiliar ones, which is great. Yes, I'm glad that you asked me to start this way, Jordan, because I don't want to assume that everybody is online. I think I have a feeling that many people are here because I am the new Ag and Land Critic, but that isn't the only portfolio, as Jordan just said, that I hold the critic role for. And since I was elected, well, actually, since the caucus formed, I should put it that way, there was a day when I covered every file. So it's lovely to share the responsibilities, of course. But all along, I have been responsible for the Aboriginal affairs, Acadian affairs, and intergovernmental affairs. And as Jordan said, that traditionally has sat with the leader, the premier in this case. And we tried to, when the caucus formed as the official opposition, to mirror, for me to mirror the premier's responsibility. So that's why I assumed those files. Also, I had a lot of other sort of managerial leader type responsibilities that I needed to have time for. So did not want then to take on any large files. Now, having said that, both of those files, Intergovernmental Affairs and Aboriginal and Acadian Affairs, are hugely significant. And of course, the events of the last few years, particularly when it comes to the Aboriginal file, have grown in significance even even in that short a time frame. There's been a recent awakening among settler people about what that means to be a settler in this unceded territory. And I think we're only just beginning to unpack the consequences, the depth of meaning that that those peace and friendship treaties from the 1700s carry forward to the 21st century. We had Jordan asked what particular parts of the files I've been involved with, and most recently it was the moderate livelihood fishery here, which is one very, very small aspect of what the consequences of those peace and friendship treaties mean from over 300 years ago. And I can tell you from my discussions with many settler people here, there's an enormous either lack of understanding or willful unwillingness to understand what the actual ramifications of those peace and friendship treaties are for us. We are all descendants, legal descendants, if you like, of those treaties. And we're only just beginning to understand what that means for life here on Prince Edward Island and in Canada living today. So there's been an enormous shift, and a very welcome shift, if you ask me, in terms of the awakening of the settler people and the beginning of a new understanding and a new awareness of what it means to live on unceded territory. We have an enormous way to go and a lot of very difficult work ahead of us. And of course, the recent events surrounding the discovery of unmarked graves and so many of the residential schools has really, again, amplified, heightened, focused people's attention on Aboriginal and Indigenous issues. In terms of Francophone issues, I have over the years been advocating for expansion of French language rights, which for so many years under previous administrations sat static, basically. There were no additional French language rights granted to islanders of Acadian descent. Well, actually for all islanders to enjoy, excuse me. So I worked hard with the previous administration to advocate for expansion of French language rights. The previous French language commissioner resigned because there was so little action. And I have to say, under this new administration, there has been more movement. We have had some new French language rights installed. And in the previous administration, in the very last year, I would say, of its tenure, there were some French language rights that were added. Also in this new administration, I want to acknowledge that the addition of place names using Mi'kmaq original names for those areas has been a really welcome thing. Again, it doesn't reflect the hard work that we're going to have to do from a legislative point of view to accommodate Indigenous rights, but it's more for me, it's more than symbolic. So there has been some work on Aboriginal and Francophone affairs. When it comes to intergovernmental affairs, I mean, that's an ongoing thing. COVID, of course, has highlighted the need for collaboration and cooperation between provinces. And we've seen when that works well and when it doesn't work well. And we've also seen why our provincehood and our gift of jurisdiction, as we like to call it, how that has served us really well in the last little while, where we have been able to establish our own rules and restrictions and governance structures around COVID. But that doesn't mean that we haven't been in very close contact with particularly our neighboring provinces and of course the federal government as we work through how COVID is going to play out and has played out. Intergovernmental affairs also, of course, deals with trade, it deals with economic issues, it deals with interprovincial boundaries, a whole host of other things. But there are always some things going on at an intergovernmental level, and perhaps the one that is most timely for us now is the carbon tax, which is currently being renegotiated with the federal government. I understand that the province is right on the cusp of having a new agreement with the federal government, which I hope is going to be a lot more progressive and make a lot more sense than the previous provincial agreement that we had on carbon pricing. So lots of work on both of those files, although it tends to happen largely in the background. I hope that's a sufficient answer, Jordan, to where I've been working on those files in the last couple of years.
No, that's really great. And I think that gives everybody a better idea of what kinds of things are included in those files. So my next question to you now, so obviously, you're the leader. You could have chosen, any other portfolios for yourself that you may have wished to. What caused you to choose agriculture and land as a portfolio that you would personally take on in the next couple of years?
Well, Michelle Beaton was doing such a terrible job. No.
Yeah.
Michelle Beaton is, and was amazing in this file, and is an incredible legislator and MLA. And I don't even know if she's on the call. I didn't see her name earlier, but no, I took this on, Jordan, because I wanted to signal to the agricultural community and more widely to islanders that this is a file that really matters to our party. And again, I don't want to suggest that it has not been a focus for the last couple of years. As you well know, the work that Michelle did, both on the agricultural side and the land side, was phenomenal. So, but I think there is something symbolic and important about a leader taking on a portfolio, and that's certainly been picked up in the media, and I was pleased to see that. And I've done a couple of interviews surrounding that, and particularly as we go into the next election. There are so many moving parts, of course, and so many challenges, governance challenges here on PEI, but really, if not very near the top of them is the challenges that the agricultural community is facing here in terms of their well-being, their sustainability, and by that I mean both environmental and economic sustainability. And that I believe the Green Party represents a radically different vision of what the future of agriculture on Prince Edward Island could be from the other parties. And so having an opportunity as the leader to magnify and give a sharper focus to this file, or these files, I should say, that was the main purpose in doing this. Also, I have a great affinity. I'm the most rural representative of all of our caucus. I'm looking at my window here over fields. There are chickens of mine running around in the yard. So I have an affinity for this file, for these files as well. And I've done a tremendous amount of work over the last 6 years since I was elected to win the respect and the trust of the agricultural community here. Of course, I did that personally for 4 of those 6 years. And I think personally, I made strides, and I think the party made strides in terms of winning that respect and being able to have a constructive conversation with the agricultural community, acknowledging the struggles that they have, but coming at it thoughtfully and with knowledge. And I would like to build on that. So again, it's probably too long an answer for that, Jordan, but that's why I took that on.
No worries. Yeah, and I know I saw you even just this spring. You've been personally involved in this file in the legislature. With your sustainable agriculture motion that you tabled and spoke very eloquently to. I think even in your throne speech response, you talk quite a bit about agriculture. So there's a little bit of foreshadowing there.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm wondering about with agriculture and land. What parts of this portfolio do you feel that you personally have the most that you need to learn about in the next little while?
Goodness, that's a great question. I mean, I suppose the easy answer and the truthful one is all of it, Jordan. One thing that I've discovered as a politician is that it's absolutely impossible to have a sufficient depth of knowledge in all of the issues that you would like to. Particularly, I hearken back to my solitary days. Mm-hmm. But even now, with a limited number of portfolios that I'm responsible for, just the volume of things that come across your desk and through your email box and over the phone and make it literally impossible to understand any issue at a depth that you would like to. So you find as a politician, you know a little bit about a whole bunch of things. And it's both dangerous and a little disconcerting for somebody like me who likes to speak from a place of knowledge. So I have tons to learn. One of the things I've recognized in my life as a politician is how little I know about this island, about a whole host of issues, about myself. Although I have learned there's no better job in the world for learning, if you are open to it, than being a politician, because you have opportunities every day to dig down on whatever topic you like. And so there is a lot of learning to do. If I was to focus in on something a little narrower than everything, Jordan, I would say that probably the land issue, land ownership, although I have read and studied the LPA for 6 years, I'm still rusty, or I still feel like I don't have a complete grasp of how all of the parts of the LPA work together, where the loopholes are, how it interacts with IRAC, what the new Land Matters Committee is going to, there's so many aspects of that, and it's very complicated because it crosses a whole bunch of different areas, and also because it's so seminally important to the personality and the character of this province. And going back, hundreds of years to the land ownership, it's always been something which has defined Prince Edward Island. And so I just feel like I don't have as good a grasp on that as I would like to. And I have to tell you that when the roles transitioned, I don't know if any of the other critics have talked about this, Jordan, but it's good for people to hear this. A lot of thought and work went into the transition period, where the former critic we'd sit down together for one, sometimes several meetings with a briefing book essentially, and the staff member who was most responsible for that file, and go through all of the topics. So there was a very ordered transition from one to the other, and Michelle Beaton was just an absolute superstar in being able to fill me in on areas where I either had very limited knowledge or in some cases no knowledge at all. So I recognize how much I have to learn. And I'm sweating. Okay. Gosh.
Yeah, it's one of those muggy days. Yeah, thanks very much, Peter. And so you heard it here, folks. If you are an expert in the LPA and and those kinds of issues and the loopholes, Peter wants to hear from you. And that's why we've invited you here today. Now, before we open up to hear from all the folks that have joined us today, Peter, I want to make sure that we have a good understanding of what is in scope and what, or conversely, what is not in scope for the agriculture and land portfolio. I know that some aspects of these things might fall under either federal or even municipal governments. So can you give us a sense of whichever is easier, what is not included as part of the activities of that department that people might expect that might be or think might be just based on the name itself? Or
Sure. Well, I mean, agriculture falls largely under provincial jurisdiction. There are a lot of funding programs, as happen in so many other policy areas, of course, through the federal government. But the province really has it's almost all within the jurisdiction of the province. Land issues are more complicated, particularly when it comes to land planning, which is a big part. Something we don't mean, land ownership gets all of the press, but land planning is really something that affects all islanders, and we have extraordinarily poor land planning here on Prince Edward Island, where 90% of the land base is controlled, if I can put it that way, through the province. There's very little local planning of land, particularly in rural areas. And the province really does little more than rubber stamp developments. There's no comprehensive sort of congruent land use policy for the province. And that typically would, and I would argue, should fall under municipal government. I think the closer to the issue, the more local the decision, or the most locally appropriate decision makers should make the decision. And when it comes to land use planning and communities, that should be in those communities, but we don't have that because of gaps in land planning, and also because of sort of a spotty municipal governance picture across the province. Although we have tons of municipalities, most of them do not have an official land use plan, which leaves enormous gaps. So there's definitely overlap between the province and the municipalities on land planning, and that's something that I would love to see corrected in the next few years. I don't think that's going to happen, but I would love to see that.
Okay, so we're looking at ownership and planning as the big issues under the land file. All right, so I'm going to now open it up to any of you who would like to speak and offer Peter your perspectives and ideas about what issues in either agriculture and land, or remember, Indigenous, Francophone, Intergovernmental Affairs, they're all on the table. And so we want to know, what you think is important, what do you think should be prioritized, or what you think that Peter should at least be aware of that he may not already be aware of. And what resources even that you could suggest. Are there particular people that you think that Peter should really sit down with and learn about certain aspects of any of these files from? So if you are familiar with Zoom, you may be familiar with the raise hand function. In case you're not, that will be found in your Zoom toolbar, usually under the reactions area. You go to reactions and you should see raise hand. Depending on the device that you're on, this might appear in different parts, different areas. You might have to go to the more, like the ... more menu, and you'll see raise hand there. If you can't find raise hand, don't worry, just use the chat. You can stick a asterisk in the chat, and that will indicate that you would like to speak, and I'll keep a speakers list and make sure that as many people as possible get a chance to contribute. I am also sharing right now a link in the chat. This is to an idea board. I'm going to be using this to take notes on anything that you are, any ideas that come up or suggestions that come up. But you can also, let's say you may be shy and you don't want to, speak, or maybe we're running out of time. You can use this idea board to add your own notes. And Peter's going to get all of these notes from us so that he can refer back to them. Okay, and so I'm gonna. I see a few hands have gone up already, and the first person was Grace Cameron. So I'm going to invite Grace to speak now.
Good evening, Peter. Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Grace.
I'm the mayor of Eastern Kings, which perhaps some of you don't know. It's quite a small rural municipality in obviously the eastern end of the island. We are in Kings County. We are one of the few municipalities that actually have an official plan and a development bylaw. And other than Surrey and Three Rivers, and let's consider them urban for the sake of this discussion. And while I certainly agree that municipal planning decisions are the closest to the people, I would like to, and I know this is probably straying a little bit into the community's portfolio, but when it comes to the land planning, which obviously needs a great deal of work, it is extremely challenging for small municipalities like our own to be able to appropriately and with a strong level of knowledge deal with these kinds of issues. As I'm sure you're aware, we've gone through two recent appeals with IRAC One of the things that in one appeal they come back with, we haven't heard in the second yet, was that it was the responsibility of municipalities to have appropriate staffing levels where you can deal with planning issues appropriately with an appropriate level of knowledge, with you know, like somebody, if I'm going to use your name, Samantha, somebody like Samantha Murphy on staff who knows the ins and outs and is able to do all of these things. We don't have that. We have a development officer for, you know, a few hours a week and a part-time CAO. And so it does make it very, very challenging. And to further complicate this whole thing is what we're finding now and some of this I think was COVID, whole COVID responsible, but I think some of it was happening before, was there's more and more people now coming to the island, either to purchase a property that they would have as a permanent property, and then hopefully they become part of the community, or alternatively, people coming here and buying summer properties. Regardless of their purpose, the challenge is, of course, is pushing up land property values and making it virtually impossible for young people within the community to purchase a land of their own. And then that, of course, exacerbates the problem of actually keeping them in the community in the first place. So I'm hoping, Peter, you know, that these are like some of the things that you will, that the government and yourself as the official opposition will be kind of taking into consideration. How are small municipalities, while they may be closest to the actual problem, how are they going to be able to afford the expertise to deal with the issues appropriately? And where are they going to get that expertise, given that there are very few planners available in Prince Edward Island right now, not only to the province and the large municipalities, you know, but, you know, tiny little places like us, you know, it makes it more challenging. Now, second thing I want to say about this is we are moving forward with doing a revamp of our official plan and our development bylaw. And pursuant to that, we got a letter from the Minister of Agriculture and Land, just kind of reminding us that the Land Matters PEI project was going on, and that might have some impact on some implications for our official plan and our bylaws. Now, the question that immediately jumped to mind is, what makes this Land Matters project any different than any of the other projects that have taken place over the last 25, 30, 40 years?
50 years. Yeah.
And I've got a call into the minister to ask him that particular question, although he hasn't called me back yet. So those are the kinds of things, and you know, might be able to tell by the way I'm saying this how I'm leaning on it, but I'm trying to be as open as I can. But these are the types of issues that are impacting the smaller municipalities. And I mean, I think probably Kings County, you know, because we are the smallest county of them all. You know, if there is some idea that perhaps there would be some, you know, larger municipal government that would take care of, you know, most of Kings County without perhaps Three Rivers or something like that, you know, there would be ways, hopefully, that would be able to work. But again, there would have to be some availability of appropriate resources to enable us to take on that planning function. You know, like, you know, there's going to be issues, and we see this here in our own small community, about, you know, a lot of cottage subdivisions, and I'm going to use that term very, very loosely, you know, that were established, you know, in the 60s perhaps, or in the 70s, before there were a lot of bylaws or official plans. And they basically kind of went, you know, higgly piggly in the farmer's field. and they're small lots, perhaps, you know, a quarter of an acre or a third of an acre. There's sewage problems that are coming from that now, you know, as you know, the erosion impacts that too. So these are all things that we're trying to kind of keep in our head as we're trying to figure out what our official plan and bylaws is going to look like. But it's a challenge. So if I would ask one thing, it's to keep the government's feet to the fire when it comes to the planning of land on PEI, not so much the ownership, but the planning. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Grace. It's good to have a perspective from a mayor of a small community. Ryan, I've got your hand up next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Ryan.
Very good. Hi, everybody. I think what I'm, just wanted to bring up, and I put it in the chat, is really just kind of an extension of what was just said. Land development and development permits are obtained through agriculture and land, but kind of I would say a bonus to this department, something that you might not expect as, you know, sort of in the trunk if it was a car, is the building codes and inspections division. And I don't really know if it fully belongs in this department. It's whenever you think agriculture and land, you don't think, you know, that's where I'm going to find building standards and building inspections. And the province adopted the energy code last year and the new versions of the building code, and there's a lot of changes in regards to that. And I don't know if that's really getting the attention it needs. With all these new standards coming in, when it's kind of in the background of a larger department. I'm not a huge fan of reorganizations of government departments, but it would seem to belong better somewhere else. I don't know where, transportation infrastructure or something of that effect. Maybe a department like that with some more kind of core technical expertise where you might expect it to live. So I just, some thought on that might be, to maybe press the government to see if that is the best place to have that. I understand that land development permits, it would make sense there, but to kind of have the full review of any, any building, construction project from any aspect, all under that department, kind of as an umbrella, I don't know if that's really the best place for it to live. And that's really the essence of what I had to say.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That's a really good question, Ryan. Let's go over to Guy or Guy. Sorry, I'm
Guy, actually.
Guy, okay.
Hi, everybody. So thank you, everybody, for being here, as always. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Peter. So I actually represent Global Green News, and we write, basically positive articles about green parties across Canada and the world. And I had a short question for Peter. I'm wondering, with, as the leader of the official opposition and with so many portfolios and, with the other members of the caucus also handling multiple portfolios, how big is your overall team, and what is kind of the strategy to tackle so many issues? I mean, Grace just pointed out, issues in a very tiny community. I can just imagine all the things on the table that Peter has to consider for the whole province of PEI. So I was wondering if there's maybe, a particular strategy that the Green Party, will take to tackle all these issues, or if how big is the team and are they able to handle all these issues, basically? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Guy. Our team, we have 8 MLAs and we have 8 support staff. And I should say that the way that we are given a lump sum budget to run our office, and we can use that for operational funding. We can use it for taking each other out for meals. We can use it for transportation, for advertising, or for staffing. And I can tell you that we use a significantly higher proportion of our caucus budget for staffing than any of the other caucuses. We have 8 staff who do incredible work. We have 3 constituency related staff. We have 2 communication staff, and we have 3 policy staff. Now, most people in the staff cover several roles, but they are all incredibly hardworking, talented, wonderful people. In terms of, do we have enough to cover it all? No, absolutely not. And I'd refer back to the comments I made earlier about the struggle of simply not being able to dig down deep enough on every issue that comes forward. That's not just true for me, that's true for every MLA, and it's also true for the staff. So you have to pick areas where you're going to focus. Now, of course, we have to be conversant on everything, but it's important that you recognize that you cannot cover everything. I'm just going to say one little bit more, Guy, because the reason we're having these video webinars now is because we had a critic shuffle. And a lot of people have asked me, well, why did you do that? People were just getting really comfortable and knowledgeable on their files. You know, I think of, well, name your MLA. After 2 years, you really have a level of a depth of knowledge and a comfort on a particular area that allows you to speak with great confidence. But if we are to form government, and of course that is the goal of our caucus, we have to recognize that as a government minister, you are not the expert. You are somebody who has to seek advice from trusted advisors and make critical decisions based on the best information you can get. So it was time for our caucus, and I include myself in this, to be moved from something that you were perhaps very comfortable with into an area where you either had very limited or no knowledge at all. So that process of having to learn about a new file becomes part of the understanding of what your role as a politician is. You're not the expert in the room. You are the person that is sometimes called upon to make very difficult decisions through a number of lenses: the short-term implications, the medium, the long-term, the environmental, the social, the economic, the political lens. All of these things you have to apply to any topic and any decision you have to make. And so training the caucus on what makes a good politician was a huge part of this caucus shuffle. And I think it also, and I think very shortly, it will demonstrate the depth and the versatility and the quality of the MLAs and the willingness that they have to do the hard work. You know, even a few weeks into their new critic roles, I can see how some of them are just, you know, completely, they're running at 100 miles an hour, and that's enormously gratifying to me. It was a sort of scary thing to do, to move everybody around, but I think it was the right thing for the individuals, for our organization, and ultimately for the party to demonstrate that we are a government in waiting. So no, we don't have all the resources we need, but I think given the small office that we are, we do a pretty exceptional job. And I don't say that with any sense of hubris. That's I'm speaking on behalf of the colleagues that I'm fortunate enough to work with.
Just if I can respond quickly, thank you very much, Peter. And if anybody is interested in reading what I personally and like the whole team writes about, it's called Global Green News. And we just follow green politicians, parties, movements, and environmental movements across the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Okay.
Guy.
Thanks for joining us, Guy. So I see one more hand up right now, and that's from James. But given the people that I'm seeing on the call here, I think some of you are probably holding back because I think there's a lot of knowledge here about these issues among the people that I see. So don't forget to get your hands up, and if you don't know how to put your hand up, stick a asterisk in the chat, and I'll get you on the speakers list. And we're looking forward to hearing from you. So James, why don't you go next?
Well, hello, Jordan, and everyone, and hello to you, Peter.
Hi, James. Lovely to not see you.
Indeed. Peter, the whole issue of the Lands Protection Act has been in the media quite a bit over the last year. And I don't know where one would actually start to ask you a question on it, because there's so many integral parts that are very important. But there is one, in fact, that I am going to put to you, and that is the total aggregate holdings. The total aggregate holdings is a clause in the Lands Protection Act that includes land rented and leased. And it also talks about the connectiveness of companies and directors. And the whole issue around the Irvings, Banco Farms, the Buddhists, and others, government has been reluctant. They're all in violation of the total aggregate holding, and they're in violation, and the government doesn't seem to want to do anything. I hope that whatever comes out of the Land Matters Committee and Advisory Group, that these corporations, charitable and non-charitable, are not going to be grandfathered. And I would like to hear what your position would be on that.
Thanks, James. There's a lot to unpack there. And I'm going to start by going right back to Grace's comments about Eastern Kings, where she talked about, I think you asked the question, Grace, is there anything new in this new Land Matters report that we haven't heard before? I asked that very question in a standing committee to the minister last week. So don't wait for a response. I can tell you what he said right now, Grace. And I'm going to tie this into what James just said, because we've had, we have a Royal Commission from the 70s, we have the Roundtable, we have the Thompson Report, we have the Carver Report, all in their own way, sort of reiterating familiar problems. So I asked the minister last week whether the Land Matters Committee, and they've now concluded all of their meetings and all of the consultations and the written submissions, whether anything, how did I put it, revelatory, anything new and different from those previous reports had appeared. And he said very unambiguously, no. So we're not looking at new problems here. We're looking at very familiar problems. And the reason they're familiar is that governments have lacked the courage to actually deal with them. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but that's the running thread for 50 years, is that governments have been unwilling to actually grasp this. James asked about aggregate holdings, and the last report that I mentioned, the Horace Carver report, A Gift of Jurisdiction, perhaps for me, the most important statement that he made in that report, and it was a question, was, is there any evidence there to suggest that as farms get bigger, they get more, they become more financially stable? There is no evidence out there to support that. So the idea that a bigger farm is necessarily a more sustainable farm from an economic point of view is just, it's based in fantasy. There is no evidence to suggest that. So now, having said that, 100 years ago, we had 14,000 farms on Prince Edward Island, and today it's been quite literally decimated. There are about 1,400 farms on PEI, about a tenth of what it was 100 years ago. So the number of farms, of course, has diminished enormously, and the size of those farms has increased, but the average size is still about 450 acres, far, 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 far away from the 1,000 acres that an individual or 3,000 that a corporation can own. So my position on this, James, is that 3,000, and by the way, as you probably know, and James would certainly know this, maybe not everybody on the call, there are exceptions to that where non-arable land can be counted out. So you can actually own up to 4,500 acres if you're a corporation of land, and more of that non-arable land has been clear cut over the last 4 years. And we have asked the question in the House whether that non-arable land, which after being clear cut, at least has the potential to become arable land, is now being counted in those calculations, and we did not get a clear answer for that. So I think the land limits are sufficient at the moment, and that's not to say that there aren't some small landholders who do a terrible job of looking after the land, and some larger landowners who might actually be doing far better land husbandry. I don't think size necessarily corresponds to the ability of a farm to produce and maintain and nurture healthy soil. But I do feel that the land limits currently are sufficient. Now, that's not a consent to opinion perhaps within our caucus, but that's the purpose of these meetings, that we need to talk about these things and hear all sides of an issue. In terms of those interlocking corporations, James, I think you started your question by asking where to start. Well, the IRAC report on the Brendel farm transaction, which I think you were referencing there, James, they only had two recommendations. And the first of them was to proclaim Bill 35, which is the, oh gosh, I can't think what the proper name of it is, but it's the beneficial ownership, to name people who actually are part of corporations. If Michelle Beaton was here, she'd be able to tell you all exactly what it means. So that was one recommendation from the report, and the other was to close the loophole so that when a corporation is sold and that corporation represents a land mass, which is what happened with the Brendel corporation, that has to go through cabinet. It has to go through executive council, because what seemed to happen with the Brendel deal was a corporation changed hands, and because it was a corporate transaction, and it was sort of exempt from the LPA and from land ownership requirements. So that's a loophole that has to be closed. And Michelle Beaton actually presented an amendment to the LPA in the dying days of the last sitting. And we were assured by the government that they were going to come forward with similar and more far-reaching legislation this fall when the Land Matters Committee finally comes. So that's why we did not pursue that at that time. So there are some very definite things we can do, James. Goodness, that was a long-winded reply. I apologize. I started wandering there.
Not a problem, Peter. Thank you very much. And I'm glad to see that you took on this portfolio. It's good to have everyone who's waiting to be government to have well-rounded input and knowledge of various portfolios. So thanks for your answer. I'll mute here and let someone else in. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Thank you, James. So I see that Catherine O'Brien, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Jordan. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Kath.
Oh my goodness, there's so many things that I could start in on, but one question I do want to bring up because it actually connects with a couple of your portfolios. So Elnway and lands. I read the presentation from Elnway for the Land Matters Committee, and one of their priorities, of course, is to acquire more land on PEI. And of course, it's very difficult because is it 90% of the province is privately owned?
Privately owned, yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you have had any conversations with them, or if you know what the process would be for them to acquire more land. I'm wondering even about whether there's some kind of connection they could have with Island Nature Trust or the Nature Conservancy, and whether they're actually trying to raise funds to purchase land, or how that's going to happen. But I think it's important, and of course we also hope that they would then be great protectors of the land.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, it's a hugely important question, Kath, because you're absolutely right that it's become front and center in politics, and I believe is going to stay there for the foreseeable future as we work this through. I would not pretend to know how this is going to play out, but I can tell you that, yeah, you're absolutely right, that one of the challenges that we have here on PEI, and it's not just from a Crown, it's not just related to Crown land and how that intersects with Indigenous claims, but for all sorts of other reasons. That paucity of publicly owned land it really restricts Prince Edward Island in all sorts of ways, protecting endangered species, for example, rivers, and all kinds of problems with it. One of the particular, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm speaking with authority here, because this is one area that I have a huge amount to learn, as we all do. But you remember in the last election, there was a commitment made by in fact, all four parties made a commitment to establish a land bank here to try and remove one of the many barriers to new farmers, new homesteaders establishing small farms here on Prince Edward Island. And one of the problems with that, and it hasn't been discussed publicly, I don't think, since, but any land that is procured by the Crown, let's say a private farm comes up for sale, the province buys it and then wants to lease that out or sell it in small parcels to new farmers. That is much more complicated now than it was even a few more years ago because of this absolutely correct assertion of Indigenous peoples to the land claim here on Prince Edward Island and beyond. So it's fraught with complication. I feel I should stop there. I had a long chat with Don McKenzie, who works with Ulnoe and is probably the legal authority when it comes to the implications of the Peace and Friendship Treaties and Indigenous rights and land ownership here on Prince Edward Island. We spoke for maybe an hour and a half on this issue, and I was made aware of just how deeply complicated this is and what the implications of the Peace and Friendship Treaties are for land ownership here on Prince Edward Island. And it's a huge topic. And yeah, I think I'll stop there, Kath, because it's something I feel I don't have enough knowledge on, and constitutional lawyers are working extraordinarily hard across this province to try and come to terms with what Aboriginal rights mean, and how Aboriginal rights and the treaties that were signed across this country intersect with Canadian law. And it's going to be an enormously complex process, and one that in many ways I look forward to it unfolding, but it brings with it some very heavy discussions that are going to have to be had. So,
presumably it's also going to seriously affect the LPA.
Well, the thing is that the way, again, as I understand it, I want to preview what I'm going to say with that. Crown land is what is subject to Indigenous claim. So when private land changes hands between two private individuals, then there is, again, I don't want to oversimplify this, then the Ulnoe's rights, claims to ownership do not apply. But when private land becomes Crown land, then that triggers the process. I'm really awfully simplifying this, Catherine, but the amount of private land here and transactions between private owners are sort of outside the scope of this. But I know Elizabeth Scholes is on the call, who has a very keen legal mind. I don't know if she wants to chime in here.
I would love to, but I know nothing about constitutional issues as it applies to Indigenous rights. But I'm very interested in this topic, and I did actually want to ask a similar question to what Catherine has asked. So I'm very happy to hear this being discussed. Thanks.
And I see Barbara just had a question in the chat about how would private land become Crown land? Is that simply if the government buys it from a private owner, then it's Crown land?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we still have a few minutes, and it's interesting, I've noticed this with some of our other discussions with the other MLAs, that we tend to focus on one topic. So almost all the questions have had something to do more with the land file than anything else, which really speaks to how hot that issue is right now. But so if anybody has anything they'd like to say about agriculture, Indigenous affairs, Francophone affairs, intergovernmental affairs, here's a little stimulation for you to think about those things. But I do see Teresa just put an asterisk in the chat, and then Barbara's got her hand up. So I'm going to go Teresa and then Barbara.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Teresa.
I'm so glad that you've taken on this position. And I know that I've chatted with both you and Jordan from time to time, accosting you on the street or at the market to say, you know, although I do now live in Charlottetown, I spent a lot of time in rural Prince Edward Island, and people were really noticing Michelle's hard work, but wondering, where's Peter? And so, you know, I do know, and I think many people know just how hard the Green Party is working for all islanders, but you've been doing that as polite adults, and not, you know, in the manner of Stephen Myers that gets a lot more attention. So, you know, people don't always see the work that's being done. So having you as the front person for land issues in the next 2 years, I think is going to be very, very critical. Just watching the shenanigans over the last month, my, you know, somewhat uninformed opinion would be that Stephen Myers has been put in that position by the potato board because he can bully and elbow his way, without having to pay attention to due process, 7 years of putting together a water act, and that Stephen Myers will also try to frame the Green Party as the enemy of farmers. And somehow, you know, we as a Green Party are going to have to counter that offense, you know. And as a musician and an artist, I'm thinking we need our own Mark Delahunty. Laurie Murphy, are you paying attention here? Like, is there a movement among the creatives on Prince Edward Island that can, you know, get a message out, not as an official Green Party message, but working on the sidelines to point out the obvious fact that the Tories and the Liberals are going to give us 50 more years of the same if people continue to vote for them. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe Stephen Myers has all of the best intentions and that the, you know, irrigation strategy is going to be fabulous, and I'll shut up now.
That's a good question, Teresa. I don't know if you wanted to respond to that, Peter.
Well, I'll say something brief. I know, and I remember speaking to you, Teresa, about my apparent absence on the land file. And, you know, I very consciously got out of the way, not just on this file, but to allow the MLAs to flourish and to demonstrate to islanders that the Green Party is not and cannot be synonymous with me, which is unfortunately the way most people got to know the party. It was so critical to our long-term well-being that the very capable and competent MLAs that surround me in my work were given the space to find their own voices and to be and to flourish.
Absolutely.
And so it was a very conscious decision that I'm not and not to disappear into the background. That's not what I hope I've done, but I realized that it did leave me open to the criticism that, you know, well, Peter isn't talking about this, and for some people, and therefore it doesn't matter to the Green Party. But I hope that we're beyond that now, and I hope with this critic shuffle that becomes even less of an issue, Teresa. But Stephen Myers absolutely will try and paint all issues as black and white, and yes, the Greens hate farmers. And it's up to us to push back on that in the way that Greens do, with good evidence, and do it in a civil way, and show that this is not a black and white issue. This is extraordinarily complex. And of course, we don't hate farmers. We want farmers to flourish. It's about, you know, and on and on and on. And that's much more nuanced. But I can tell you from discussions with the public that I know when Stephen Myers stands up in the House and he does one of those bombastic rants, everybody on that side of the room thumps their desk and there's great whooping. But that's not playing out well in the island public. My sense, far more often than not, people are saying, we like the civility, we like the informed debate and the constructive conversation that's happening, and that Stephen Myers, or whatever so I know it plays well in the House. The media is not buying it either, I don't think. So I think we just have to trust ourselves and carry on being who we are and doing our good work and not shying away from it, but always coming at it from an evidence-based point of view and pushing back constructively and respectfully.
Exactly. Now, I think that the last week's news from McCain's is really going to be a big help, because when McCain's can come out in support of regenerative agriculture, yep, why can't the Irvings, and why can't we make that stand in Prince Edward Island? That's terribly helpful.
It is.
Yeah, thanks, Peter.
Thank you. A little shocking, though, that mega corporations are now leading the way when it comes to what agriculture can and should be. Anyway.
It is, but it does put the Irvings in a kind of position where...
And the devil is in the details. I'm sorry to interject, but the thing is that what some people call regenerative agriculture and what others call regenerative agriculture is not always the same, but we can talk about the details some other day.
Sure, yeah, of course.
Good point though, Maria.
Okay, so and I see that we've got Elizabeth's hand up. So as long as you're okay to stay for another couple minutes, we'll take one last question. Peter, is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So Elizabeth.
Thanks, Jordan, and I'm sorry you have to talk to Mr. Schlompig. Of course, that's Richard's handiwork. I wanted to ask a question about agriculture and climate, and it relates a little bit to what Teresa just said, which is, I guess, basically Stephen Myers trying to paint the Green Party as anti-farmer. And I think we've heard a lot about how climate change is affecting farming, but I don't think we're hearing a lot about how farming is affecting climate change. And I realize that this puts people in a difficult position, because to be really looking at the evidence and the reports and all the studies, I think requires us to be a bit more critical of the farming practices that have contributed hugely to the climate problem we now face. And I would be interested to know how that's going to be approached from this point on, because I don't think we can really tinker around the edges and think that things like regenerative agriculture are going to get us out of this mess. There are some really hard questions that we need to ask and expect significant change if we're going to really have an impact. So I just would be interested to know what the thinking is as we continue to grapple with this problem.
I really appreciate that question, Elizabeth. And I'll go back to one of the things I said at the very beginning, that the Green Party, I think, represents a very different vision of what the future of agriculture could be on Prince Edward Island. We do some things really well here, but we have, no, I'm not going to go down that road to answer your question, Elizabeth. Let me say that the second largest contributor to our carbon output here on Prince Edward Island is farming after transportation. And as you said, we talk a lot about the impacts of climate on farming, but less about how farming contributes to that. And it's not so much the diesel tractors plowing the fields, that's part of it. And plowing the fields is a big problem as well. No-till agriculture would be a wonderful step forward here. But to do that, we need to grow far less root crops than we do currently. But the idea that soil can sequester carbon, and the idea that our diets, and I suspect this is part of what you were getting at, Elizabeth, what we eat contributes enormously, for better or worse, to the carbon footprint associated with farming. So a move away from meat-centered diets to far more vegetable-centered diets is going to be an enormous part of this. I'm really not quite sure where to go with this. I think that I agree with you that some substantial, profound changes have to occur, but I have to be careful here, because when in the same way that we talk about we need to stop digging fossil fuels out of the ground and setting fire to them, whether that be coal or oil or natural gas or whatever, we have to make sure that the people who rely on that industry for their welfare are taken care of, and that we have a just transition away from fossil fuels. We need to do the same thing with agriculture. If we're going to say, well, we can't continue to farm as we are, we have to make some radical changes here, then you need a government that's prepared to step up and say, this is the new vision of what farming needs to be, and we are going to support you in your transition from where we are now to where we need to be. And that's a huge project. And I obviously don't have all the answers to that, but I think having that, acknowledging that this is not, as you put it, tinkering around the edges, Elizabeth, and I 100% agree with you on that, is where the conversation has to start. And Jordan referenced the sustainable agriculture motion that we presented in the House, which in a much more articulate way than I've just fumbled my way through the last couple of minutes, explained what the vision that the Green Party has for the future of agriculture on PEI is. So I hope that actually the discussion on that did not conclude in the House. So I'm looking forward to that motion coming back when the House reopens in the fall. I think I should probably stop there. That was, again, an enormously long and largely garbled answer.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And
that was great, Peter. Sorry, Jordan. And thank you for mentioning the idea of funding for transitioning. I think that's really important. We can't just expect people to stop on a dime and start doing something differently. This is their livelihoods, and it's important to help people, not put upon them. So I think that's very important. Thanks.
Thank you.
And yeah, I see that Karen Murchison was asking there about the Green Party's vision for agriculture, and Peter mentioned that he kind of laid a lot of that out in his motion. So I'm just going to put a link here.
Thank you, Jordan.
To a page where you can actually find the motion as well as a video to watch Peter speak to that motion. I think it's about 20 minutes to half an hour, probably altogether. So he talks quite extensively about it there. And so we're at 8:08 p.m. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. But I really thank everybody so much for not only coming and but participating and contributing your ideas and your questions, and just the thorny issues that are crying out for solutions. So I am going to tomorrow. I'm going to be emailing the recording, and I'm also going to be sending you again the link to our idea board, where I've been taking down all the ideas that have been coming up here today. But if there's anything else that comes up for you over the next few days, you will be able to add them, add your own sticky notes onto this idea board. And then next week on Monday is when I will hand over the package to Peter, so that he'll have all of the input, both from tonight and anything that comes into your mind over the next little while. I'm just also going to take this opportunity to promote the remaining 3 Meet the New Critics sessions that we've got planned. And I'm putting a link to our event calendar in the chat as well, so you can find all the details there to register. So next week we have 2. On Tuesday, we're going to be speaking with Carla Bernard. She is taking on the social development and housing file, which is very important. That covers our social assistance and of course housing. There's so many issues around that. Tenants' rights and the rising cost of housing, which we talked a little bit about today, and things like that. Social housing. Carla is also the critic responsible for the status of women, which she has been for the last couple of years as well. So that hasn't changed. So anything having to do with status of women, you can also speak with her about that on Tuesday. And then on Thursday, we're going to speak to Michelle Beaton. That's Peter's predecessor in Agriculture and Land, but she has now taken on the big health and wellness file, which is, that's the number one issue that people seem to be, in most of the polls, I see health and wellness, and that includes mental health, of course. Those are huge issues. So I think there will be a lot of interest in that. And then finally, on July 15th, we're going to wrap that up with Trish Altas. She is now the official opposition critic for economic growth, tourism, and culture. So there's kind of a lot of things that she's going to be dealing with, especially with some of the hardest hit industries in the province are included in that, tourism and culture. So how can we grow those industries sustainably back as we recover from COVID-19? So again, go to our events page, register for those sessions, and we hope to see you there. Good night, everybody.
Night. Thank you, Jordan. Thanks, everyone.